Let's talk about some of the biggest crossover mistakes. Okay, so for starters, let's get the more basic crossover out of the way because then I got a few bones to pick with that crossover. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. But for your more basic crossover, whichever hand's dribbling that same side foot, you're usually gonna step with last and plant. So you wanna make sure you're doing that. Getting that foot involved, planting, then getting the crossover off. If you start moving your legs too quick, you're gonna hit that leg a lot of times. So think about having that leg planted for a split second, pushing with that hand quick, and then get the other leg moving. Just as the ball's getting into this hand, then start thinking about driving that other leg forward. Another mistake would be having your hands really far apart or really high off the ground, with exceptions. We'll talk about that in a second. But when we're talking more of our basic crossover that you'll use most often, you'll want to think about having this hand low to the ground, waiting to catch the basketball. You'll want to release with this hand low to the ground. And then you'll also want to have those hands close to each other, so it's almost like they're clapping into that crossover. What that does for you is it allows you to not only have the basketball go this way by letting the ball slide into this hand, but I can also push it back this way. If I see an opportunity to attack over there, or if a defender is going to try to poke at the ball there, I can push it out of his space. And part of what goes into making that happen is avoiding another mistake, which is this. Upright, narrow stance, not good. You want to make sure your feet are at least shoulder width apart, probably a little bit more on most crossers. Again, we'll talk exceptions in a little bit. But also think about having your hips low to the ground. Notice how that brings my hands lower to each other so I can get them low to the ground. If I'm up here, they're only gonna get so low. Plus being down low here, I can sway more, get my hips and my chest involved into fakes. I can load up my legs. Notice how my knee, ankle, and hip are bent so I can drive into different directions, whatever that direction may be. I've got options available. Okay, so all that out of the way, let's talk about two of the other biggest mistakes. And both of these have multiple pieces, but the first is thinking about that ball motion always being this right here, this V motion, right? And always being this side to side angle. We want to think about moving the basketball in different directions if we want to be able to be effective in games. And we also want to think about playing around with heights. So at its core, what we're talking about here is having only one way of moving the basketball on your crossovers is the mistake. You want to think about also being able to pull that basketball back. You want to think about pushing it forward. Notice on that one, the ball comes up more high, 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 and then pushed down versus making this V motion. I'm going to have it like that. I want to think about doing that more V motion crossover forward. I want to think about high crossovers and low crossovers. I also could think about doing more of just a slight hand switch where the ball's almost going straight up and down. I could think about having the ball go almost exactly horizontal, but having it really low and wide. Play around with those motions and bring them in with the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is another mistake to avoid. But the reason you need these different motions with the basketball and ability to move it in different directions, heights, all that stuff, is because there's different game situations and there's defenders that are going to start to see this from you all the time, and for most other players for that matter. And guess what? This is obvious. This is predictable. They know exactly where the ball is going to be at all times, and they know where they can poke at it and steal it from you. But if they try to reach for it down low, boom, you have the ability to push it over the top of them. If they try to steal it, you can meet it halfway before it even gets to your midpoint and push it back out. And that's where the next mistake comes into play. And that is always doing that same footwork. That becomes painfully predictable. You're gonna take the one step and get into it. Play around with your timing of the footwork, your hip height and positioning. So I talked before, like you normally wanna be low. But what if you come from upright, then get into that step? Kind of looks like that Iverson cross, doesn't it? What if I step with this foot and pull it back? What if I shuffle into the crossover? What if I shuffle the opposite direction? What if I step with the opposite foot in that same direction? What if I step with the opposite foot in the opposite direction? What if I step with the same foot in the same direction, but slightly after the crossover? What if I step further forward before getting into the crossover? What if I step back and then get into the crossover? See how all those things really change the dynamic of the move? Now in game situations, I can throw my defender off with unexpected footwork and it's not predictable. But also if I find myself in a pinch, I got all these different footwork options to get myself out of it. That way in game situations, I can be more free-flowing and react. I have all these different options, so no matter what the game throws at me, I can feel comfortable and just flow. So within a span of about a minute, I gave you a lot of different ways to manipulate the way you're moving the basketball and your footwork. Go ahead and rewatch those and see how you can mix and match some of the different ball movements with the footwork movement. That's where the magic happens. Example would be this more over-the-top crossover into that out jab like that, or maybe stepping back and then going into a drive. There's all kinds of things you can play around with. But the first key to getting anything off your handles is having good ball control and that good footwork. You can improve your footwork, athleticism, and ball control with the free workout that's pinned to the comments. And if you want more specific crossover moves, check out this video right here.